Hello and welcome back to another Bible reading.
Hello.
We are in Matthew 27, and we are now finally there.
We are. We've gotten to the point where it's about to wind down.
Yeah, and the winding down of Jesus is the starting
Of the winding up
of the
of the
winding up
Messianic Kingdom.
of the kingdom. And he's had his trial before the Sanhedrin. Now he's going to be brought before...
Such as it was.
Yeah, a real trial, right? And now he's going to be brought before Pilate, and we're going to see a lot of events unfold here.
Yes, we are. We're going to get some hearts revealed and see how ugly human beings can look when they're getting into their selfishness.
And a lot of this, the narrative kind of speaks for itself.
It does. It really does. Now when morning came, the chief priests and the elders of the people conferred together against Jesus to put him to death. They got the people with them now. He's not delivering the messianic goods of letting Israel be the top kingdom in the world and those nasty Romans bow to them. So they've lost interest in him, most of them have. And they bound him and they led him away to be delivered to Pilate, the governor. Getting official now, aren't we? Then when Judas, who had betrayed him, saw that he had been condemned, he felt remorse and turned the 30 pieces of silver back to the chief priests and elders, saying, I have sinned by betraying innocent blood. But they said, what is that to us? See to it yourself. So he threw the pieces of silver into the temple sanctuary and departed, and went away and hanged himself. The chief priests took the pieces of silver and said, it's not lawful. They're getting really, boy, they're so scrupulous, aren't they? It's not lawful to put them into the temple treasury, since it's a price of blood. They conferred together and they put the money and took the money and brought the potter's field as a burial place for strangers. For this reason, the field has been called the field of blood to this day. I finished the verse. Then that which was spoken through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled, and they took the 30 pieces of silver, the price of the one whose price had been set by the sons of Israel, and they gave them for the potter's field, as the Lord directed me. Okay, got some prophecies going here. Got a couple of things scrooched together here. Says a lot about how the Jews looked at Scripture and type-antitype relationships.
Yeah, they, both are recognizing something about this money that reveals something deeper.
Yes.
Judas recognizing, for 30 pieces of silver, I portrayed a friend of my Lord.
Mm-hmm.
He's sorrowful, and yet he decides to take his own life.
It says an awful lot too. Simon Peter is sorrowful, but he does not take his own life.
Yeah, and I just can't help but think that if Judas could have taken this same emotion that he felt and put it towards the kingdom, like Peter does, the force he could have been.
Exactly, but he was ultimately selfish about it.
Yeah.
I'm hurting, I've done something wrong, I'm going to get out of it. And that was not a good way to deal with it at all.
And it's kind of characterized his life.
Yeah.
When you look at him, the other gospel accounts reveal that he was not just dipping one time, but he was constantly
skimming,
dipping into the treasury, spending it on his own. Mm-hmm. Not the fact that he was ingenuine in following Jesus, he just never had that rich soil that was going to produce fruit.
No, he was an opportunist, you might say. I don't think he hated Jesus at all, but he saw opportunities there. And then he has his moment where it all kind of comes clear to him. See to it yourself. What's that to us? They were using him.
And then the difference with Peter is Peter's always showed a very genuine and pure heart. Though he made mistakes, though he messed up, he sometimes lived in fear. He lived out his fear and even in his denial. But man, when you see his response when he comes to himself,
yes,
and how much he devotes himself to the Lord, that really separates the wheat from the chaff, right?
It does. He doesn't get into this selfishness mode of, oh, no, look what I've done. Well, there's part of that there, but what can I do? What's the way to come out of this? What can I do to put a constructive face on this as best I can? And he found a way to do that.
the fact that Jesus always knew this about Judas, and yet he always treated him like one of the others.
He was a friend.
You know, like if I knew secretly someone was going to betray me, wouldn't that change the way you relate with them?
Every once in a while.
You know, and Jesus, we don't see that.
He's got that agape love.
No.
He will do what is the best for him to do for Judas' best interest, whether Judas takes advantage of that or not.
And then the chief priest here trying to go to the law and what's permitted. You just had a trial. That was a farce.
Farce. they've had a lynch mob, for goodness sakes.
Where's your 2 or 3 witnesses? True witnesses.
True witnesses. No. I forget who it was who said that patriotism is the last bastion to which a scoundrel flees. Well,
there's a sting.
this is similar to that. Yeah. The law is the last bastion to which a scoundrel flees.
And get good old. Hey, we did the right thing.
We did the law. We weren't going to take that money. It's blood money. No, not us.
They bought the potter's field, so the non-Israels can hang out and be buried there.
Oh, what righteous men! Yeah, Jesus stood before the governor. The governor questioned him, saying, "This is Pontius Pilate. Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus said to him, "It is as you say," a colloquialism. Well, but yeah.
Yeah.
And while he was being accused by the chief priest, John's going to get into more of this, but we'll get into that when we get to John. He did not answer. Then Pilate said to him, "Do you not hear how many things they testify against you?" And he did not answer him with regard to even a single charge, so the governor was quite amazed. The way prisoners usually act, is it?
No. Well, and interestingly enough, if you put all of the Matthew accounts together, of how many times they've tried to trip Jesus up, to trap him, to betray. They've never been able to. He's always had an answer. He's always turned it back on their head. And so at this point, all these things they're testifying against you. His life has been a testimony against those testimonies.
That will be his rebuttal, if you will.
Yeah.
Now, at the feast, the governor was accustomed to release one of the people, a prisoner that they wanted. This is a Passover feast. It's a custom. The crowd can choose somebody that's in jail. At the time, they were holding a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. So when the people gathered together, Pilate said to them, "Whom do you want me to release to you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called Christ?" For he knew that because of envy, they had handed him over. He thinks he's going to play this, but we're past that. While he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife came to him with a message saying, "Have nothing to do with that righteous man, for last night I suffered greatly in a dream because of him." But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowds, and they've worked the crowds, to ask for Barabbas and put Jesus to death. But the governor said to them, "Which of the two do you want me to release to you?" And they said, "Barabbas." Pilate said to them, "Then what shall I do with Jesus, who is called the Christ?" And they said, "Crucify him." And he said, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they kept shouting all the more, saying, "Crucify him." Let's pause there for just a second. Yeah, there's a tradition that Barabbas had his first name was Jesus, and that Pilate may be saying, "Which Jesus do you want?" I don't know if that's true or not, but he is saying, "Which do you want?" Here they've got a man in Barabbas who is what they're falsely accusing Jesus of being, an insurrectionist. And the people will choose the true insurrectionist and let Jesus go.
The fact, that, so in the Bible, you have these, like, go back to Adam and Eve. Adam is persuaded by his wife. And actually, we see that a lot, that men are influenced. The fact that this crowd and the Sanhedrin can turn Pilate against the advice of his own wife really twists what the norm is in Scripture. That shows how much they have really bended the law without breaking.
This man's going to die.
And the persuasion, and even Pilate's wife has a dream that this is not right.
Which to a superstitious person like Pilate would have been pretty weighty.
Yeah,
but no.
And it's kind of like those courts where someone's trying to talk. If you've ever seen people who go to colleges and they're trying to speak on something and they just shout over
them down because you don't want to hear what they got to say because they don't like what they got to say.
That's what we're doing here.
So when Pilate saw that he was accomplishing nothing, very pragmatic, but rather that a riot was starting. That's the worst thing that could happen to a Roman governor, is have Rome hear that you can't keep the people in their place. He took water, washed his hands in front of the crowd, saying, I'm innocent of this man's blood. See to that yourselves, as if that could absolve him. And all the people said, his blood shall, oh my, be upon us and upon our children. And oddly enough, they're prophetically correct.
Yeah.
Then he released Barabbas to them, but after having Jesus scourged, which was a horrible thing, he took him out to be crucified. So, scourging, that's a brutal thing, horrible thing. A whip, and the strands of the whip were pieces of glass and bone, and the people who are doing the whipping are brutal men.
Yeah.
Sometimes people died as a result of that. Jesus, of course, did not, but he is absolutely, literally shredded.
Well, look at all the people the people who are in the know. The Sanhedrin chief priests understand these accusations are false.
Yes.
Pilate understands these accusations are false.
Yes.
Judas understands these accusations are false.
Yes.
And every single one of them tried to wash their hands of it in a way. Judas by throwing the money back.
Yeah.
Chief priest by not accepting the money. Pilate here washing his
hands.
But look what happens to the people. The people have been convinced by all of the powers that be that this needs to happen, and they're willing to make a statement that I think is the reason why Jesus makes his statement on the cross. Forgive them, for they do not know what they do. They don't know what they just made. Because if they truly accepted that price, there'd be no hope for them.
No. In the Passion of the Christ, which has
the movie. Yeah.
The translation of the Aramaic dialogue. This is his blood be upon us and on our children is the one thing Mel Gibson chose not to translate. It was for politically correct reasons.
Yeah.
But because this was a terrible thing to call upon yourself.
I'm not sure I would utter that. Nor would I want to.
I mean, yeah. But it shows what happens when people, the mob mentality.
Yeah.
They're acting like a bunch of wild animals.
But the paradox to this is the fact that if they later go on to accept Jesus, they will have his blood on their heads.
Yes, it will.
But in a cleansing way, not in the weight of
You're going to deal
penalty.
with the blood one way or the other.
Yeah, that's kind of a cool. I mean, I just love the way Jesus does everything.
Oh, yeah.
He's a
pretty
cool
good,
guy. He's
isn't
a
he?
pretty good guy. And the fact people think this story's made up, and man, it blows my mind.
No, there's so much subtlety and nuance in a relationship. It's just people couldn't pull something like this off.
No, I think it's my turn to read now.
I believe it is.
All right, 32. Oh, I hate reading this part.
No, actually, it's verse 27.
Okay, so you're still reading. You
I
keep
am.
reading.
We're
My
close.
bad.
It was close. Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the praetorium, gathered the whole Roman cohort around him. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him. After twisting together a crown of thorns, they put it on his head and a reed in his right hand. And they knelt down before him and mocked him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" They spat on him. They took the reed and began to beat him on the head. After they had mocked him, they took the scarlet robe off him, put on his own garments back, and led him away to crucify him.
Everyone's willing here to call him his true title, just not truthfully.
How paradoxical is that?
Yeah.
Had they only known, which they're going to come to know at some point. But this is so incredibly brutal and harsh, and people at their worst. And yet Jesus, he goes through this with, if you will, dignity.
This would be much for someone who actually deserved it. This would be over the top. Over the top.
But the creator of all things, who's come to save human beings, has never done a thing wrong in his life and is there for everybody. To do this to him is just, it's horrific.
And Jesus claims that this is done for you. This cup I take.
Yes, yes.
So
when we partake of that communion cup, we need to invest a lot of what he invested into our partaking of it. And remember, as they're coming out, they found a man of Cyrene named Simon, whom they pressed into service to bear his cross. It's crucifixion time.
Yep. When they came to the place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull, they gave him wine mixed with gall to drink. But he tasted it, he refused it. after crucify, once again, these are all prophecies as well. All these things. Matthew litters it, and he doesn't
No.
always say this is to fulfill
No.
the Scripture, but a
If
lot.
you know the Old Testament.
If you know your Old Testament, you know what he's doing. After crucify him, they divided his clothes by casting lots, and they sat down and were guarding him there. And even the casting of lots, it was crucified or was prophesied that he would do that. Above his head, they put the charge against him in writing, "This Jesus, the King of the Jews."
How ironic is that?
Then 2 criminals were crucified with him, one on the right, one on his left. Those who passed by were yelling insults at him, shaking their heads and saying, You who would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross." In the same way, the chief priests and the scribes, elders mocked him and said, "He saved others, but he cannot save himself." Once again, that's a true statement.
Yeah. He's having a good time over all this.
Yeah,
mocking
they're
him.
mocking him
And yet,
for saving
that's
others.
true.
And in fact, the reason why he doesn't save himself is to
So he
save
can save
others.
us.
I mean, it's just, he is the King of Israel. Let him come down now from the cross. We will believe in him. He trusts in God. Let God rescue him. If he takes pleasure in him, for he said, "I am the Son of God." In the same way, even the criminals who were crucified with him taunted him. Now watch this. This is essentially the same temptation that Satan gave him in the wilderness. I will give you all that you see, and you won't have to go through this. They are saying,
You can be in charge of this.
you can crown yourself now. Show us all that you are king. We will submit.
Oh, yes.
If
Out
you
of
would
fear, not
just-
faith.
Yeah, if you would just show us. And yet, Jesus, once again,
He's-
get behind me, Satan.
Exactly. It's the Father. He's going to serve him no matter what.
And they taunted him. And interestingly enough, we don't have it necessarily here, the rescuing of the criminal, but also Barabbas. He's taking the place of all these people and saving people. And you're seeing even in his death,
Yeah.
these little
Even
nuances.
then, people are being spared.
People are being spared. From noon until 3 in the afternoon, darkness came over the whole land. Appropriate. About 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani." That is, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Once again, this is a quotation. Psalm 22. I do not believe Jesus actually thinks God is forsaking him. I think he's calling into question Psalm 22, which David says his enemies and people believe he's being forsaken by God. But at the end of the psalm, he's actually not.
Stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. Isaiah 53.
Yeah.
No. And yet, he is experiencing as if he had.
Yeah. Because, once again, kind of like Jesus being the Passover lamb and the scapegoat, the scapegoat had to, you basically put the sins on him and he would run out and it would be like the sins being taken away. And Jesus, for a moment, has to bear all.
And God cannot intervene.
Yeah.
He cannot make it any easier or lighter
Yeah,
than what it has to be.
absolutely. So when some of those standing there heard this, they said, "He's calling for Elijah." Immediately, one of them ran and got a sponge, filled it with sour wine, put it on a stick, and offered him a drink. But the rest said, "Let's see if Elijah comes to save him."
But they're just having a good time here.
Yeah.
You know, let's just see. Maybe we'll get an extra treat here. All this will come along.
Well, yeah, and once again, the Elijah figure who they had been waiting for, which
Which
Jesus
they cut
already,
his head off, by the way.
yeah, Jesus already proved to be that, greater than that. Immediately, I already read that. But Jesus cried out again with a loud voice and gave up his spirit. And that just goes to show, and John shows this even more, that Jesus was in control of all these events.
Right.
The fact that he's giving up his spirit, in a sense, he's every choice he's made,
It's in his hands.
it's in his hands. Suddenly, the curtain of the sanctuary was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth quaked
how
and the rocks were
symbolic is
split.
that?
And the sanctuary, basically the holy place, the most holy place, had a veil, and it was cut. And now there's entrance. You can see that as a dividing, or you can see that as now, those who are in this kingdom, once again, if you're in the holy place, which the Hebrew author talks about being the church, entrance into the holy place is being brought. The sacrifice is being made.
Yes. Those curtains had on them cherubim.
Yeah.
Cherubim was placed at the garden to keep folks from going in there to the tree of life. And now we got this representing that the distance between God and human beings
It's being
is
closed.
gone.
Okay. The tombs were open, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised, which is a prefiguring of resurrection. They came out of the tombs after his resurrection, entered the holy city, and appeared to many. When the centurion and those who with him were keeping watch over Jesus saw the earthquake and the things that happened, they were terrified and said, "Truly this man was the Son of God."
Hardened Roman centurion, tough as nails. He sees it.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, all these mocking of him being the Son of God, King of Jews, Messiah, this isn't mocking.
No.
This isn't in a sarcastic tone.
No,
This,
he's touched. He's having a moment here.
Many women who had followed Jesus from Galilee looked after him. They were watching from a distance. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of Zebedee's sons.
Wow, we got some women here who seem to have a little bit more courage than some of the guys.
Yeah, they were following. They don't leave. But what in this society, you know, when it was evening, a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph came, who himself had also become a disciple of Jesus. I love that.
And we're not told anything about this, but he saw some stuff here.
Yeah. And interestingly enough, earlier in Matthew, remember, it's harder for a rich man.
Rich man.
But we have a rich man because later it says, with God, all things are possible.
possible.
And we're seeing that being
we got
fulfilled
that
right
right
here.
here.
It's awesome. He approached Pilate, asked for Jesus' body. Then Pilate ordered that it be released. So Joseph took the body, wrapped it in clean, fine linen, and placed it in his new tomb when he had cut into the rock, which is also prophesied about. And John gives us a little interesting, who's along here with Joseph of Arimathea? Who helps him out?
Ooh, Nicodemus.
Nicodemus. He left after rolling a great stone against the entrance of the tomb. Mary Magdalene and the other Mary were seated there facing the tomb. So Jesus is buried, but that's not the end.
Oh no! For everybody else, that's the end. But guess what? He's also going to defeat the grave and death.
And he's been talking about it so much. Look at the guards they put up over
Oh
this.
yeah, they're not going to let that go down.
They're not going to let him, because let's say even if he's raised, remember they tried to put Lazarus to death. Hey, if he's raised from the dead,
Oh well, boy.
we'll stick him again.
Yeah, let's get him. No, there's no way anybody's sneaking him out of this.
No. The next day, which followed the preparation day, the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered before Pilate and said, "Sir, we remember that while this deceiver was still alive, he said, 'After 3 days I'll rise again.' So give orders that the tomb be made secure until the third day. Otherwise, the disciples may come steal him and tell the people." They still don't believe that Jesus
They're
actually
taking
did
no
it.
chances because really, the chances of him being stolen were very remote. But they're not taking any chances at all.
Yes, they'll tell the people he has been raised from the dead, and the last deception will be worse than the first. So they said this will be worse for us. Because almost it's kind of like the unknowing, news out there. That's worse than when he's actually there proclaiming it, because you can't verify or de-verify.
I know.
But actually Jesus is going to come and verify. So.
Yes.
You have a guard of soldiers, Pilate told them. Go and make it as secure as you know how. And let
They
me
knew
tell
how.
you, they knew how. They went and secured the tomb by setting a seal on the stone and placing the guard. So when you think, there's a lot of people who try to explain away the resurrection.
Oh yeah.
And-
Well, they got to, because they're not going to accept it.
And as Lee Strobel kind of brings out, in the case for Christ, the resurrection is the linchpin. If
If they could have.
deny the resurrection, and you can verify and prove the resurrection was a farce, then everything else
all
is gone.
gone.
Paul even says in 1 Corinthians 15,
Exactly.
if Jesus isn't raised from the dead, our hope, we're foolish for following this.
And yet everybody associated with it on what became the right side came to strongly believe that was the truth.
Absolutely.
It actually happened.
It actually happened. He appears to over 500.
Yeah, Paul's able to talk about there's hundreds of people alive
Yeah.
right now who saw him.
And to have the boldness to say, go talk to those people. Don't just take my word for it. Go
check it
find
out.
any of them.
Yeah, Luke, when he writes his gospel, he's going around checking things out. Guess what? It checks out.
It checks out. And we have non-Christian historians writing about it, verifying it. You cannot historically deny the resurrection.
No, there are a few who will say, very, very few, but they're mocked by their own atheistic historian fellows. If there's one thing that you can say about Jesus, he was crucified and his tomb was empty.
Yep. And the fact of the matter is, Jesus, John will call that the sign that ought to put everything in the place. And yet, once again, the same sign that will cause many to believe will cause others to be a stumbling block.
If that's true, everything's true.
Yeah.
If it's false, everything's false.
Yeah. If you can get on board the resurrection, then everything else is easy to get on board with. So, all right, well, that's Matthew 27, and tomorrow we will be doing Matthew 28. Remember, I know the reading schedule says there's no reading tomorrow, and that we're doing Mark 1 and Matthew 28 together, but no, we can't follow that schedule.
No.
So, we'll see you tomorrow. We love you. God bless. If I can stop